Hey guys, tonight we are making a fortune. The world runs on gold and silver, but raw metal is useless until it carries the king's face. We are joining the medieval mint master. We are going to strike the currency that paid for castles, wars, and empires. This is a story about purity, weight, and the sound of silver. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, hear the ring of the anvil, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Tower of London stands against the grey Thames sky like a permanent shadow. The outer walls are limestone, quarried from Caen in Normandy and shipped across the Channel stone by stone. They are 12 feet thick in places. Inside those walls, past the yeoman warders and the armed guards, past the royal apartments and the armoury, there is a building that hums with a different kind of power. The Royal Mint. It sits low and fortified, with narrow windows that barely let in light. The door is oak, banded with iron, and it takes 2 keys to open. One key belongs to the warden, the other belongs to the king's controller. No man enters alone. Inside, the air changes. It becomes heavy. It tastes like metal dust, like the inside of a bell. Your tongue picks up copper, silver, the bitter edge of lead. The walls are stone here too, but blackened from centuries of furnace smoke. The floor is packed earth in some places, stone flags in others, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet carrying heavy loads. There are no windows in the main working chamber. Light comes from oil lamps hanging on iron chains, and from the furnaces themselves, which glow like red eyes in the dimness. This is where the mint master works. His name might be Guillaume or Thomas or Jean, depending on whether we are in London or Paris or Bruges, but his role is always the same. He is the man who transforms raw metal into the lifeblood of kingdoms. He is the alchemist who does not seek to turn lead into gold, but who does something far more practical and far more valuable. He takes silver, tests it, purifies it, melts it, shapes it, and strikes it into coins that will travel from hand to hand across continents. Every penny that buys bread, every groat that pays a soldier, every shilling that settles a debt, they all begin here in this smoke-filled chamber under his watchful eye. The mint master does not work alone. Around him move the moneyers, the skilled craftsmen who have trained for years to do this work. There are the melters who tend the furnaces, the beaters who hammer metal into sheets, the cutters who punch out blank discs, the strikers who bring down the hammer and die to imprint the king's face. And there are the guards, always the guards, watching every gram of silver, accounting for every scrap of waste. Because silver is wealth, and wealth attracts thieves like a carcass attracts flies. But before any of this can begin, before the furnaces are lit and the hammers raised, there is one task that matters more than all others. The assay, the test, the proof, because the king's currency must be trusted, and trust begins with purity. The silver arrives in many forms. Sometimes it comes as foreign coins, debased and worn, collected by merchants and money changers. Sometimes it comes as plate, old cups and candlesticks donated or seized, their decorative past about to be erased in fire. Sometimes it comes as raw ore from the mines of Germany or Bohemia, already smelted but still impure. And sometimes, most precious of all, it comes as sterling bars, cast in previous mints, certified and stamped, but still requiring verification. Because men lie. Stamps can be forged, and a mint master who allows debased metal into the king's currency will find himself in chains or worse. So the assay begins. The mint master stands at his workbench, which is scarred and stained from decades of testing. Before him is a delivery, let us say 200 marks worth of silver, delivered by armed escort from a merchant who melted down Flemish coins. 200 marks, nearly 300 pounds of metal. A fortune that could buy a manor house, or equip a company of archers, or feed a town through winter. But is it pure? The mint master selects his sample. He does not take metal from the top of the chest, where it might have been salted with purer material. He reaches deep, choosing several pieces at random. He weighs them on his balance, a beautiful instrument of bronze and iron, sensitive enough to measure a single grain of wheat. The sample must be exact, 30 grains. That is the standard test weight. He cuts the silver with sharp shears, snipping off precisely what he needs, and the scraps go into the waste bucket to be accounted for later. Nothing is lost. Nothing is forgotten. Now comes the cupel. It sits waiting on the bench, a small shallow cup no bigger than a man's palm made from bone ash. The making of cupels is its own craft. You take the bones of cattle, burn them until they are white and crumbling, then grind them into finest powder. Mix with a little water to make a paste, press into molds and dry slowly. The bone ash is porous, like a very fine sponge, and it has a property that makes it invaluable. It absorbs lead. When you heat silver and lead together in a cupel, the lead oxidizes and soaks into the bone, leaving pure silver behind. The mint master places his 30-grain sample into the cupel, but silver rarely comes alone. It comes alloyed with copper, with lead, sometimes with traces of gold or tin. For this test, he wraps the sample in a carefully measured amount of lead. The lead will help draw out impurities, acting as a flux carrier. The ratio must be precise. Too much lead and the test is meaningless. Too little and it will not work. He has done this 10,000 times. His hands know the weight without thinking. The cupellation furnace is smaller than the great melting furnaces. It sits in the corner, built of fire brick, with a chamber barely large enough to hold a dozen cupels at once. The fire inside is clean, burning, seasoned hardwood charcoal, the kind that gives intense heat without smoke or sparks. An apprentice tends it, adding charcoal piece by piece, working the bellows with steady rhythm. The air inside the chamber shimmers with heat. When the mint master slides his cupel inside with long iron tongs, the temperature is already 700 degrees. Hot enough to melt lead, hot enough to begin the transformation. Through a small viewing port he watches. The lead melts first, becoming a silver-gray pool that gleams in the firelight. Then it begins to move, swirling slowly as convection currents stir it. The impurities are oxidizing, reacting with the air, transforming into litharge lead oxide. The litharge is a golden yellow color, and it spreads across the surface of the molten metal like oil on water. Then it begins to disappear, soaking into the bone ash of the cupel. The cupel is drinking the lead. This process is called cupellation, and it is ancient, older than kingdoms, older than Rome. The alchemists knew it. The temple refiners of Babylon knew it. It is a patient art. The mint master does not rush. He watches the colors shift and flow. Yellow litharge, hints of red where copper impurities burn, the silver underneath trying to shine through. The cupel darkens as it absorbs more and more oxide, changing from white to gray to brown. The metal pool shrinks as the lead is drawn away. And then, after perhaps 20 minutes, something happens. The surface of the metal, which has been dull and turbulent, suddenly clears. It becomes bright, radiant, a mirror of liquid silver that reflects the furnace light like a tiny moon. This is called the lightning or the brightening, and it is the moment the mint master has been waiting for. It means all the lead is gone, all the base metal consumed. What remains is pure silver. He removes the cupel carefully, setting it on a brick to cool. He cannot rush this either. Hot silver will oxidize if exposed to air too quickly. He waits, perhaps 5 minutes, watching the glow fade from red to black. Then, with a small hammer, he taps the cupel. The bone ash crumbles away easily, and sitting in the bottom is a tiny button of silver, still warm, gleaming white. Now comes the final measurement. He places the silver button on his balance against standardized weights. He knows what the result should be. If the original sample was sterling silver, the English standard of 92.5% pure, then from 30 grains of alloy he should recover approximately 27¾ grains of pure silver. The balance tips. He adjusts. A smaller weight. Smaller still. The beam levels. He reads the result. 27.8 grains. Well within tolerance. This silver is good. This silver is sterling. This silver can become the king's coin. But the mint master does not relax yet. One test is not enough. He repeats the assay with a second sample from a different part of the shipment, then a third. All must pass. All must meet the standard. Only when he is satisfied does he mark his ledger. 200 marks of silver. Purity confirmed. Accepted for coining. Now the real work begins. The silver, verified and counted, is moved to the melting room. This is the heart of the mint, dominated by the great furnaces. They are built of fire brick and clay, standing as tall as a man, with openings at the front like dark mouths. Inside, the fires burn day and night when coining is in progress. The fuel is charcoal, and it is consumed in tremendous quantities. A single melt might require a bushel of charcoal. Over a week of continuous coining, the mint will burn through tons of it, purchased from the charcoal burners who work in the forests outside the city. The crucibles are made of clay, shaped like deep bowls with a pouring spout on one side. Each crucible can hold perhaps 30 pounds of silver, and the clay must be of the finest quality, mixed with ground bone or grog to prevent cracking under thermal stress. A crucible might last for a dozen melts if it is well made and carefully used, but eventually they all crack and must be replaced. The broken pieces are not discarded. They are kept because silver droplets cling to the clay, and when enough fragments accumulate, they are ground down and washed, and the silver is recovered. Every grain has value. Every particle is money. The melters load the crucible with care. They start with the verified silver, bar by bar, filling the clay vessel. But sterling silver is not pure silver. It is an alloy, and for good reason. Pure silver is too soft for coinage. A pure silver penny would bend in your hand, would wear smooth in a few months of use. So copper must be added, 7.5% by weight, to give the coins hardness and durability. The copper comes in small ingots, weighed precisely on the great balance. For every 100 pounds of silver, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of copper. No more, no less. The loaded crucible is placed into the furnace using long tongs. The heat inside is immense, perhaps 2,000 degrees, hot enough to make iron glow orange, hot enough to melt stone if the temperature climbed higher. The silver and copper begin to heat. You cannot see this at first. The crucible simply sits there, dark and inert. But after 10 minutes, after 15, the metal inside begins to soften. It slumps, it liquefies, and then it begins to glow. The glow starts as a deep red, visible only if you shield your eyes and peer into the furnace. Then it brightens to orange, then to yellow. The surface of the molten metal takes on a sheen like polished glass, and beneath the surface you can see convection currents moving, hot metal rising, cooler metal sinking, a slow, majestic swirl. The silver and copper are mixing, becoming one alloy, homogeneous and perfect. The melter knows when it is ready. There is a quality to the way the metal flows, a brightness. He signals to the mint master who comes to inspect. Together they decide. Now, the crucible is lifted from the furnace, a delicate operation that requires two men with long-handled tongs. The crucible weighs perhaps 50 pounds when full of molten metal, and it radiates heat like a small sun. You cannot stand close to it. Your face burns. Your hands sweat inside their leather gloves. The men move with practiced choreography, slow and steady, no sudden movements, no mistakes. A spill would be disaster. The silver would soak into the earth floor and be lost, and lost silver is a crime, a theft from the king's treasury. They carry the crucible to the casting area, where the molds wait. These are not elaborate molds. There are no decorations yet, no designs. At this stage, the goal is simply to transform the liquid metal into a solid form that can be worked. The molds are made of stone, carved into long, narrow channels, like gutters. Each channel is perhaps 2 feet long, half an inch wide, and half an inch deep. The stone used is fine-grained, smooth, capable of withstanding the thermal shock of molten metal. Before each pour, the molds are coated with a thin wash of chalk or clay to prevent the silver from sticking. The pour is a controlled act. The crucible tips slowly, and the liquid silver emerges from the spout in a glowing stream. It looks like light poured into the world, like captured sunlight. The metal flows down the channels, filling them perfectly, seeking its level like water. Where it touches the stone, it begins to cool immediately, the glow fading from white to yellow to orange to red to grey. Steam rises where the chalk coating burns away. The air fills with a sharp metallic smell, ozone-like, the smell of hot silver. One crucible fills perhaps 20 molds. The metal cools quickly, faster than you might expect. Within 2 minutes, the glow is gone. Within 5, the silver is solid enough to touch with bare fingers, though still warm. Within 10, the castings can be removed from the molds. They are lifted out with pincers, and they emerge as long, thin bars of silver called fillets or straps. They are rough on the surface, with a texture from the stone mold, and they are still slightly irregular in cross-section. But they are the right general size and shape. They are ready for the next stage. The beating, the hammering, the transformation of these rough fillets into sheets thin enough and uniform enough to become coins. This is the work that makes the mint sing with metal music. This is where the rhythm begins, a rhythm that will continue for hours, for days, as long as there is silver to work and coins to strike. The beating bench is a massive thing, oak timbers as thick as a man's thigh, braced and reinforced, because it must absorb tremendous impact without moving. Set into the top of the bench is the anvil, and this is not the pointed anvil of a blacksmith, but a flat-faced anvil of hardened steel, polished smooth as a mirror. The surface must be perfect, because any imperfection will transfer to the silver, and imperfect silver cannot be coined. The beater takes a fillet in his tongs. It is still warm from casting, which is good, because warm silver is more malleable than cold. He lays it on the anvil and raises his hammer. The hammer is not large. It weighs perhaps 3 pounds, heavy enough to move metal but light enough to control precisely. The head is steel, the face flat and polished like the anvil. The handle is ash, sanded smooth, the wood darkened from years of palm sweat. The first blow falls, clang. The sound is pure and high, a musical note that rings through the workshop. The fillet flattens slightly under the impact. The beater rotates it, repositions it, strikes again, clang, and again, clang. He develops a rhythm, 2 strikes per second, steady as a heartbeat. The fillet spreads under the blows, becoming wider, becoming thinner. The warm silver is plastic, flowing under the hammer, stretching out. Around him, other beaters are working at other benches. Their hammers fall in different rhythms, creating a complex percussion that fills the room. Clang, clang, clang from one bench. Clang, clang from another. A syncopated pattern that never quite repeats. It is loud, but it is not unpleasant. There is music in it, or at least rhythm, the ancient rhythm of metalwork that goes back to the Bronze Age, to the first smiths who discovered that striking metal makes it stronger and more useful. The beater must work the fillet evenly. If he strikes too hard in one place, that spot will become too thin. If he neglects an area, it will remain too thick. He turns the silver constantly, working from center to edges, folding it back on itself when it becomes too long, heating it again in a small furnace when it becomes work-hardened and brittle. This is called annealing, heating the metal until it glows cherry red, then letting it cool slowly. The heat rearranges the crystal structure inside the silver, making it soft and workable again. After perhaps an hour of beating, the fillet has become something new. It is now a flat sheet, perhaps 8 inches wide and 3 feet long, and most importantly, it is uniform in thickness. The beater checks this with a gauge, a small tool with precise notches cut into it. He slides the silver into the gauge. It should fit snugly in the notch marked for penny thickness, which is approximately 1 millimeter. Too thick and the coins will be overweight. Too thin and they will be underweight. Either way is a problem. Either way is a failure of the moneyer's art. If the thickness is correct, the sheet is marked with a small punch that identifies which beater made it. Accountability, always accountability. Then the sheet goes to the next station, to the cutters who will punch out the blank discs that will become coins. But that is a story for the next stage of the process, and we have traveled far enough for now. Let us pause here in this moment, in this workshop filled with the sound of hammers and the glow of furnaces. Let us appreciate what has been accomplished. Raw silver, possibly impure, possibly fraudulent, has been tested and verified. It has been melted with copper to the exact proportion required by law. It has been cast into workable forms. It has been hammered into sheets of precise and uniform thickness. Every step has been measured, checked, recorded. Every gram of silver has been accounted for. The mint master stands in his domain, watching his men work. His hands are scarred from burns. His lungs are grey from breathing metal dust for 30 years. His hearing is damaged from the constant hammering. But he is wealthy beyond what most men can imagine because he earns a percentage of every coin struck, a fee called seigniorage. And he is powerful because he controls the money supply of a kingdom. Kings need him. Merchants fear him. He can detect fraud with a glance, can estimate the purity of silver by its color and weight in his hand. Tomorrow, or perhaps later tonight, the blank discs will be struck. The king's face will be stamped into the silver. The coins will be counted, bagged, and distributed. They will flow out into the kingdom like blood through veins, making trade possible, making civilization possible. A farmer will accept one in exchange for wheat because he trusts that the next man will accept it in turn. A soldier will fight because he knows his pay will come in these coins. A merchant will cross an ocean because these coins have value anywhere they travel. But that trust, that value, begins here in this smoky chamber with the mint master and his assay, his furnaces, his hammers. It begins with men who understand that money is not magic. Money is metallurgy. Money is precision. Money is the sound of hammer on anvil, ringing out hour after hour, striking the currency that makes empires possible. The furnaces glow. The hammers fall. The silver flows and spreads and transforms. And somewhere far away, a king sits on his throne, unaware perhaps of the exact process but very aware of the result. The coins will come. They always come. And with them comes power, the power to reward friends and punish enemies, to build cathedrals and wage wars, to shape the world according to royal will. All of this from silver dust in the air and the patient work of testing, melting, and beating. All of this from the ancient art of the mint master. Sleep well, knowing that someone somewhere is still doing this work, still transforming metal into money, still striking coins that will outlive us all. The rhythm continues. The hammer falls. The silver rings. And the world turns on. The silver sheets lie stacked on the cutting bench, still bearing the marks of the hammer, still warm from the beater's hands. They gleam under the lamplight, and if you run your finger across the surface, you can feel how smooth they are, how uniform. But a sheet of silver is not a coin. Between this moment and currency lies precision work, the kind that separates the master craftsman from the apprentice, the kind that requires hands trained for years to see what the eye alone cannot detect. The cutter sits at his station with the great shears resting across his lap. These are not ordinary scissors, not the small snips you might use for cloth or parchment. These are forged iron, as long as a man's forearm, with blades thick as your thumb. The cutting edges have been ground and honed until they could split a hair. The handles are wrapped in leather because the metal grows cold in winter and burns hot in summer from the friction of cutting. The pivot pin, the rivet that holds the two blades together, is as thick as your little finger and has been hammered from hardened steel because anything softer would bend under the force required. He takes the first sheet and lays it flat on his cutting table. The table is scarred wood, dense oak, that has been cut and marked 10,000 times but refuses to split. Beside him sits a gauge, a template made of bronze. It is a circle, precisely 2 centimeters across if we are making pennies, smaller if we are making halfpennies, larger for groats or shillings. This template has been made by the master of the dies and verified by the warden of the mint. It represents the official size of the king's currency, and it cannot be altered or adjusted by anyone below the rank of royal appointee. The cutter does not trace the template onto the silver. There is no time for that and no need. His eye has learned to measure. He positions the shears and cuts. Snip. The blades come together with a sharp metallic sound, not quite a ring, more like a bite, like teeth closing on metal. A rough square of silver drops away from the sheet. He repositions, cuts again. Snip. Another square. Snip, snip, snip. The rhythm is different from the hammering, less regular, more thoughtful. Each cut requires judgment. The blanks do not need to be perfect circles yet. They need to be roughly the right size, with a little extra material to account for the final trimming that will come later. The sound of cutting fills this corner of the workshop. Snip, clink. The blank falls onto the growing pile. Snip, clink. Another joins it. The silver pieces ring against each other, a softer sound than the hammers, almost musical. If you were to close your eyes in this room, you could map the work by sound alone. The deep clang of beating from one corner, the sharp snip of cutting from another. The roar of the furnaces underneath everything, a constant drone like distant thunder. The offcuts, the scraps between the blanks, are not thrown away. This is silver. Even the smallest fragment has value. The cutter sweeps them into a leather bag that hangs from his bench. At the end of each day, these scraps will be weighed and recorded in the mint master's ledger. When enough accumulates, they will be melted down again, returned to the crucible, reformed into new fillets. The cycle continues. Nothing is wasted. But there is a problem with these blanks, a problem that is not immediately visible, but which the experienced moneyer knows is there. The hammering that flattened the silver into sheets has also changed the metal's internal structure. The silver crystals have been compressed, deformed, locked into stressed configurations. The metal has become what smiths call work-hardened. If you tried to bend one of these blanks, it would resist. If you struck it with a die, the impression would be shallow and unclear. The metal has lost its plasticity. It has become brittle. This is where the annealing furnace comes into play. It is smaller than the great melting furnaces, built at waist height for easy access, with a chamber perhaps 2 feet across. The fire inside burns clean and hot, fed with the same hardwood charcoal used for melting, but the temperature is lower, controlled. The goal is not to melt the silver, but to heat it to a specific range where the crystal structure can reorganize itself, where the internal stresses can relax, where the metal can remember how to be soft and malleable again. The annealer works with an iron basket, a mesh container that can hold perhaps 100 blanks at once. He loads it with the rough-cut pieces, then uses a long-handled fork to push the basket into the furnace. The heat inside is intense, perhaps 700 degrees, hot enough to make the silver glow but not hot enough to melt it. Through the furnace opening, you can watch the transformation. The blanks start gray and dull. Then, as they heat, they begin to glow. First a deep red, like embers in a dying fire. Then brighter cherry red, the color of ripe fruit, the color of blood in sunlight. The annealer knows this color. He has seen it 10,000 times. When the silver reaches cherry red, uniformly across all the blanks, the annealing is complete. The crystal structure has reorganized. The metal is soft again. He withdraws the basket with quick efficiency, because timing matters now, and plunges it into the quenching bath. The water is cold, drawn fresh from the well that morning, and when the glowing silver hits it, the reaction is violent. Hiss! Steam explodes upward in a white cloud that billows toward the ceiling. The water boils furiously around the basket. The sound is like a giant serpent exhaling, a prolonged sibilant hiss that fills the room. And beneath the hiss, a deeper sound, a kind of crackling, as the metal contracts rapidly, as the heat is sucked away into the water, as the silver transforms from cherry red to black to gray to the color of mercury. The quenching only takes seconds. But in those seconds, the temperature of the silver drops from 700 degrees to perhaps 30 degrees. This rapid cooling locks the reorganized crystal structure in place. The blanks are now soft and workable again, ready to receive the sharp impression of the dyes. The annealer lifts the basket from the water. Steam still rises from it. The blanks are slick and wet, and they need to be dried, usually by spreading them on cloths in front of a small fire, turning them occasionally until all moisture is gone. While this physical work proceeds, in another part of the mint, in a quieter room with better light, the most skilled craftsman of all pursues his art. The die maker, the graver, the man who will put the king's face into steel. Die making is precision work that borders on the impossible. Consider what is required. The die is a cylinder of steel, perhaps 2 inches across and 4 inches tall. The working face, the end that will strike the coin, must be perfectly flat. On that flat surface, the graver must carve an image in reverse, in negative, sunk into the steel. When the die strikes a silver blank, the image will transfer in positive, raised from the surface of the coin. But here is the extraordinary part. The image must be tiny. The king's portrait must fit within a circle 1 centimeter in radius. The letters around the edge, spelling out the king's name and title, must be crisp and readable, but smaller than the letters in a manuscript. And it must be carved into steel, not soft silver, not wax that can be scraped and reformed. Steel, metal hard enough to resist a file, metal that will survive striking thousands of coins without wearing smooth. To carve such metal requires tools of even harder material. The gravers themselves are made from the finest steel, forged and heat-treated until they achieve a hardness that puts them at the very limit of what medieval metallurgy can produce. Some gravers are tipped with small pieces of diamond or corundum, the only materials harder than steel. The die maker sits at his bench with his magnifying lens mounted on a stand before him. The lens is a piece of rock crystal, ground and polished spherical, perhaps the finest optical instrument in the kingdom, aside from what might be found in a scholar's study or an astrologer's tower. Through this lens, the surface of the steel die is magnified 4 or 5 times, allowing the graver to see details that would otherwise be invisible. He begins with the portrait. This is the obverse die, the side that will show the king's face. The die maker has never seen the king in person, most likely, but he has a model to work from. It might be a drawing provided by the master of the mint. It might be an older coin from the previous reign or from a neighboring kingdom. It might be a small sculpture, a portrait medal. The style is formal and stylized. Medieval coin portraits do not attempt realism in the way that later centuries will demand. The king appears in profile, facing right by convention. He wears a crown. His hair is indicated by a series of curved lines. His face is noble but generic, almost archetypal. This is not portraiture as art. This is portraiture as symbol. The face says, this is kingship. This is authority. This is the power that makes this metal valuable. The graver selects his tool, a fine V-shaped cutter, and positions it on the steel. He taps it gently with a small hammer. Tick! A tiny curl of steel springs away. He moves the graver a fraction of a millimeter, taps again. Tick! Another curl. This is how the work proceeds. Not in flowing lines like drawing with ink, but in thousands of tiny cuts, each one removing a fragment of metal, each one contributing to the whole. The work is slow. A single die might take a week to complete. The graver cuts the outline of the face first, a curved line that defines the profile from crown to chin. Then he begins on details. The curve of the crown, each point and jewel suggested by tiny cuts. The eye reduced to an almond shape because there is no room for an iris or pupil. The nose, a simple triangle. The mouth, a short line. The hair flowing behind the head in parallel curves. Every element is simplified, reduced to its essential geometry, because detail is impossible at this scale. Around the portrait goes the legend, the inscription. This is perhaps even more exacting than the portrait, because letters must be precise and readable. The legend on an English penny from the reign of Edward the First reads something like Edwardvs Rex Angli, Edward, King of England. The letters are carved using punches, small steel tools with individual letters raised on their striking face. The graver positions the punch, strikes it with his hammer, and the letter is driven into the die face. Tap, an E appears. Reposition, tap, a D. The spacing must be even. The letters must follow the curve of the coin's edge. There is no room for error. A misplaced letter cannot be easily corrected. The die would have to be discarded and the work begun again. The reverse die is different. Instead of a portrait, English pennies traditionally show a long cross that divides the coin into 4 quarters. This cross has a practical purpose beyond decoration. If a penny is too valuable for a small transaction, it can be cut along the cross lines into halves or quarters. A cut penny is still legal currency, still accepted at its fractional value. The cross makes cutting accurate. The graver cuts the cross arms with a straight-edge guide, ensuring they are perfectly perpendicular. In each quarter of the cross, he might place a small symbol, 3 pellets perhaps representing the Trinity, or a small flower, or nothing at all, leaving the quarter blank. Around the edge goes another inscription, perhaps the name of the mint city. CIVITAS London for London. CIVITAS EBORACI for York. This tells merchants where the coin was struck, which is information they value because different mints have different reputations for honesty and precision. When the die is complete, it must be hardened. This is a delicate process. The steel cylinder is heated to critical temperature, somewhere around 800 degrees, until it glows bright orange. Then it is quenched, plunged into oil rather than water because water cools too quickly and can crack the steel. The oil quench creates a surface hardness while leaving the core of the die slightly softer and more resistant to shattering. After hardening, the die might be tempered, gently reheated to a lower temperature to reduce brittleness. The die maker watches the colors bloom on the steel surface as it heats. Pale yellow means 1 degree of hardness, darker yellow another. Blue means the metal is softer. He quenches again when the color is right, when experience tells him the die will be hard enough to strike thousands of coins, but tough enough not to crack under the hammer's impact. Now we have 2 dies, the obverse with the king's portrait and legend, the reverse with the cross and mint mark. These 2 pieces of carved steel are the heart of the entire minting operation. Without them, all the testing and melting and hammering and cutting produces only blank silver discs. With them, those blanks become currency, become money, become tokens that carry the king's authority and the kingdom's faith. But the dies cannot simply be laid on a table and struck. They must be mounted in a system that allows them to align perfectly, that holds them stable under tremendous impact, that makes the striking process as efficient and repeatable as possible. This is where we meet the pile and the trussel, 2 words that sound medieval because they are 2 tools that have remained essentially unchanged from Roman times through the Renaissance. The pile is the bottom die. It is mounted in a log, a section of tree trunk that has been selected for its density and lack of knots. Oak is best, or perhaps ash. The log is about 3 feet tall and perhaps 18 inches in diameter, massive enough that it will not shift or jump when struck. The pile itself is a steel shaft with the die face on top and a long spike on the bottom. This spike is driven into the log, hammered down until the die face stands at a comfortable working height, perhaps waist level for the striker. The log is usually set into the ground or surrounded by packed earth to hold it absolutely stable. The trussel is the top die. It is also steel, also carved with an image, but its mounting is simpler. The die face is on the bottom. The top of the trussel is a flat, striking surface. The trussel is held in place by the striker's hand during the moment of impact, or in some mints it is held in a mechanical guide that ensures proper alignment. Between these two dies, the blank will be placed. The striker's job is to bring them together with enough force to drive the images into the soft silver, to transform the anonymous disc into a coin that speaks with the king's voice. This is the climax of the entire process, the moment when all the careful preparation pays off. But it is also the most dangerous part of the work, the stage where injuries are common, where a misaligned blow can shatter a die, where the violence of metalworking is most apparent. The striking room is organized around the pile. The log stands like a monument in the center of the space. Around it, at arm's reach, are the supplies. A basket of annealed blanks, still slightly warm. A bucket of water for cooling the dies, which heat up from repeated striking. A collection of tongs and picks for handling the coins. And the hammer, the great striking hammer that is the final tool in the chain. This hammer is not like the beater's hammer. It is massive, weighing perhaps 12 pounds, with a head of solid iron and a handle of straight-grained ash nearly 3 feet long. The face of the hammer is flat and polished smooth. It must be heavy because it must deliver tremendous force in a single blow. The dies will not gradually press the image into the silver. They will strike it, instantly, in the fraction of a second, while the hammer is in contact with the trussel. The striker is usually a young man, strong, with quick reflexes and good coordination. He stands beside the pile with the hammer resting on his shoulder. His assistant, often an apprentice, picks up a blank with tongs and places it carefully on the pile die, centering it as precisely as possible. The trussel is positioned on top of the blank, held steady. The striker raises the hammer high, measuring the distance, judging the angle. Then he swings. The hammer falls. It accelerates under gravity and the striker's muscular effort. It strikes the top of the trussel. The impact is tremendous. Crack. The sound is sharp and violent, nothing musical about it, a sound like breaking ice or splitting wood. The force drives the trussel down against the blank, which is pressed between the two dies with pressures that reach tons per square inch. The soft silver has nowhere to go but outward and into the recesses of the dies. It flows like thick honey under that pressure, filling every line, every letter, every detail of the carved images. The entire event takes perhaps a tenth of a second. The striker knows immediately if the blow was good. He can feel it in the hammer's rebound, in the clean, solid contact. He lifts the trussel away. The assistant removes the struck coin with tongs. If the work was done properly, the coin shows clear, sharp images on both sides. The king's profile stands out in relief on the obverse. The cross and legend are crisp on the reverse. The edge of the coin, where the silver was pressed outward, shows a slight rim, a raised circle that helps protect the images from wear. But often the first strike is not perfect. The blank might have been slightly off-center. The trussel might have tilted at the moment of impact. The blow might have been too light, leaving the impression shallow. Each of these problems has a solution. Off-center blanks can sometimes be restruck, placed more carefully, and hit again. Shallow impressions definitely need a second blow. Tilted strikes usually mean the coin must be discarded, melted down, returned to the crucible to begin the process again. The striker develops a rhythm. Place, strike, remove. Place, strike, remove. He might strike 100 coins in an hour if the work goes well. The hammer rises and falls with metronomic regularity. Crack, crack, crack. The sound echoes through the mint, joining the other sounds, the hammering of the beaters, the snipping of the cutters, the roar of the furnaces. It is the sound of money being made, the sound of wealth being created from skilled labor and raw materials. The dies heat up from the work. The repeated impacts generate friction and compression heat. After perhaps 50 strikes, the pile becomes too hot to touch. Water is dripped onto it from a sponge to cool it, creating little puffs of steam. The trussel must be changed more frequently because it absorbs more of the impact and heats faster. A skilled striker works with several trussels in rotation, setting aside the hot one to cool while using another. Die wear is the constant enemy. Each strike removes microscopic amounts of steel from the die faces. The sharpest details, the fine lines of the king's hair or the serifs on the letters wear down first. After 1,000 strikes, the images begin to blur slightly. After 5,000, they are noticeably degraded. A die might be good for 10,000 strikes if the steel was excellent and the hardening perfect, but most dies fail before that. They crack, usually along the stress points near the edge of the design, or they wear so smooth that the coins they produce are no longer acceptable. Or, in the worst case, they shatter under an especially hard blow, sending steel fragments flying like shrapnel. When a die fails, work stops until a new one can be brought from the graver's bench. This is why the die maker is always working, always producing spares, always staying ahead of the striker's demands. A busy mint might go through a dozen dies in a month. In times of heavy coining, when the king needs money for war or building projects, the die maker might have apprentices helping him, several gravers working simultaneously to keep the strikers supplied. The struck coins are collected in leather bags, each bag carefully counted and weighed. The count is double-checked by the mint master and the warden's representative. The weight is verified against standards. A bag of 1,000 pennies should weigh a specific amount, calculated from the weight of individual coins. If the bag is light, it means the blanks were underweight or the silver was debased. If it is heavy, it means overly generous blanks or possibly the inclusion of foreign matter. Coins that pass inspection are marked as ready for circulation. They are bagged and sealed with the mint master's personal seal, a stamp in wax that proves the bag has not been opened or tampered with. These bags will be transported under guard to the royal treasury or distributed to money changers and merchants who have provided silver for coining. Coins that fail inspection have different fates depending on the failure. Poorly struck coins with unclear images are melted and recycled. Coins that are the wrong weight are also melted. Coins with minor flaws, slight off-center strikes, or faint impressions might be accepted for local circulation where standards are less strict, or they might be sold at a discount to merchants who will transport them to regions where the king's currency is less familiar and the quality less scrutinized. The entire process, from the arrival of raw silver to the bagging of finished coins, might take a week if everything goes smoothly. But it rarely goes smoothly. Dies break. Blanks warp in the annealing. Crucibles crack. The furnaces consume their clay linings and must be repaired. Workers injure themselves, burned by hot metal or struck by misaligned hammers. The mint master must solve 100 small problems every day, making decisions about whether to accept marginal blanks, whether to continue using a wearing die, whether to speed up production at the cost of quality or maintain standards at the cost of output. And always there is the pressure from above. The king needs money. Wars do not wait for perfect coins. Cathedrals demand payment for stonemasons and laborers. The machinery of government requires a steady flow of currency to function. So the mint works long hours, sometimes through the night, the furnaces glowing in darkness, the hammers ringing out across the city, announcing to anyone who hears that wealth is being created, that the king's power is being struck into silver, one coin at a time. In this moment, in this space between the die maker's precision and the striker's violence, we find the strange alchemy of money. It is not magic. It is craftsmanship. It is the graver's patient cutting of steel, each tiny line contributing to an image that will be replicated thousands of times. It is the striker's strength and timing, the perfect blow that neither damages the die nor leaves the impression shallow. It is the coordination of a dozen skilled workers, each performing their specialized task, each depending on the others. The silver that came as foreign coins or melted plate has been transformed. It has passed through fire and force, through testing and verification, through cutting and shaping and striking. And now it emerges as something new, something that carries value beyond its metal content. A struck coin is worth more than an equivalent weight of raw silver because it bears the king's image, because it has been assayed and verified, because it represents trust and authority. This is the true creation that happens in the mint. Not the physical transformation of metal, but the social transformation of value. The dies are the instruments of that transformation, and the graver who cuts them and the striker who uses them are the agents of change. Rest now, knowing that somewhere the hammers are still falling, the dies still striking, the king's face still being impressed into silver. The work continues in darkness and in light, in peace and in war. As long as there is trade, there will be coins. As long as there is power, there will be men who strike the symbols of that power into metal. The trestle rises and falls. The pile stands firm. And between them, silver becomes currency, becomes value, becomes the medium through which civilization flows. The striker stands at the pile with the hammer resting against his shoulder. The weight of it, 12 pounds of iron and ash, has become so familiar that his body barely registers it anymore. His muscles know the balance point, the exact position where the handle sits in his palm, where his fingers wrap around the wood. He has struck 10,000 coins, perhaps more. His right arm is noticeably thicker than his left from the work. The calluses on his hands are like leather. He does not think about what he is doing. His body knows. The assistant, a boy of perhaps 14, picks up a blank from the basket with iron tongs. The blank is still warm from annealing, soft enough that if you pressed your thumbnail into it, you could leave a mark. He positions it on the pile die with care, centering it over the king's portrait that is carved in negative into the steel. The blank must sit flat. Even a slight tilt will produce a bad strike, an off-center coin that will have to be melted and reformed. The trestle comes down. The striker holds it in his left hand, steadying it, feeling for the moment when it sits properly on the blank. The trestle is warm too, heating gradually from the repeated impacts. Through his fingertips he can sense the alignment, the way the steel cylinder wants to settle into position. When it feels right, he nods. The hammer rises. The striker's whole body moves together. His legs drive upward. His torso rotates. His arm extends. The hammer head accelerates, gathering momentum, and at the perfect instant it strikes the flat top of the trestle. Thwack. The sound is enormous, a percussion that you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. The impact drives the trestle down against the blank, which is crushed between two hardened steel dies under pressures that would shatter stone. The silver has no choice. It cannot compress. The metal has to go somewhere. It flows outward toward the edges of the blank, and more importantly, it flows into the recesses of the dies. Every line that the graver cut into the steel becomes a raised line on the coin. Every letter pressed into the die becomes a raised letter on the silver. The king's profile, the cross, the legends, all of it transfers in the fraction of a second that the dies are in full contact. The metal flows like thick liquid under that pressure, like honey, like wax, though it remains solid throughout. It is plastic deformation, the crystals of silver sliding past each other, reorganizing, conforming to the new shape imposed by the dies. The striker lifts the trestle immediately. Hesitation would mean the dies stick to the hot silver, making removal difficult and potentially damaging the fresh impression. The assistant reaches in with tongs and plucks the coin from the pile die. It is done. A blank disc of silver has become a penny of the realm. The transformation took perhaps half a second from the moment the hammer began its descent to the moment the coin was lifted free. The coin is hot, almost too hot to touch even with the tongs. The assistant drops it into a leather bucket where it clinks against dozens of others, still cooling, still carrying the heat of creation. If you looked at the coin now closely, you would see the images are sharp and clear, every detail transferred. But you would also see that the silver is dull, covered with a dark film. This is fire scale, oxidation that formed on the surface during annealing. The coin is genuine and properly struck, but it does not look valuable. It looks grey and tarnished, like something dug from the earth. The rhythm continues. Place, thwack, remove. Place, thwack, remove. The striker and his assistant work with the coordination of long practice. They do not speak. There is no need. Each knows what the other will do. The boy reaches for the next blank before the previous coin has finished falling into the bucket. The striker's hammer is already rising for the next blow. They are not fast, exactly. Speed leads to mistakes. But they are efficient, steady, relentless. 1 coin every 6 seconds. 10 coins per minute. 600 in an hour. In a full day's work, perhaps 4,000 coins struck by this pair alone. Other strikers work at other piles throughout the room. Each pair maintains its own rhythm, slightly different from the others. The result is a complex percussion, hammers falling in syncopation, creating patterns that shift and overlap. Thwack, 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 thwack. It is loud enough that conversation is impossible. The workers communicate with gestures, with the tilt of a head or the raise of a hand. The sound carries beyond the mint walls, out into the streets of the tower, across to the river, announcing to the city that money is being made. The dies begin to heat from the work. Every impact generates friction. Every compression of the silver creates resistance that converts to thermal energy. After 200 strikes, the pile is noticeably warm to the touch. After 400, it is hot enough that water dripped onto it sizzles instantly into steam. The trussel heats faster because it absorbs the direct impact of the hammer. The striker rotates between 3 different trussels, using one while the others cool in a water bath. When a trussel comes out of the water, it steams as the surface moisture evaporates from residual heat. Die wear is constant and inevitable. The sharp edges of the engraved design, the finest lines of the king's hair and crown, the serifs on the letters, these are the first to soften. The striker can feel it happening. Fresh dies have a certain resistance when struck, a crisp, clean impact. As the dies wear, the feel changes, becomes slightly softer, less defined. After 3,000 strikes, the coins coming off the pile begin to show blurred details. The mint master inspects them regularly, examining coins at random intervals. When the images are no longer acceptably sharp, the dies are retired and replaced with fresh ones from the graver's bench. Sometimes a die fails catastrophically. A crack that has been growing invisibly through the steel finally reaches critical size. The striker brings the hammer down, and instead of the solid thwack of a good strike, there is a different sound, a crack like breaking ice, and fragments of steel fly outward. Everyone in the room freezes. The striker steps back, checking himself for injuries. Usually the fragments are small, propelled with force but not enough to penetrate clothing. But eyes can be damaged. Hands can be cut. This is dangerous work, and every moneyer has scars. The failed die is examined. If the crack is small, confined to the edge of the design, the die might be salvaged by grinding away the damaged area and continuing to use what remains. But usually a cracked die is finished. It is set aside with the other failed tools, eventually to be melted down, and the steel recycled into new gravers or punches. The pile must be replaced immediately. Work cannot stop. The striker's assistant runs to fetch a spare die, while the striker clears away fragments of the broken one. The bucket fills with struck coins, hundreds of them, thousands. They clink and rustle against each other with a sound like distant rain. But they are not finished. The striking has given them their images, their legal identity as currency, but they are still covered with that dark fire scale. They need to be cleaned, brightened, made to look like the valuable objects they are. This is where the blanching comes in. The blanching room is adjacent to the striking room, and it is dominated by large iron cauldrons suspended over brick furnaces. The cauldrons are filled with a cleaning solution, a weak acid made from wine tartar and water. Wine tartar is the crystalline deposit that forms inside wine barrels during fermentation. When dissolved in water and heated, it becomes a mild acid, strong enough to dissolve metal oxides, but not strong enough to attack the silver itself significantly. The blancher, usually an older worker whose days of heavy hammering are behind him, loads the struck coins into iron baskets, perhaps 1,000 coins at a time. The basket is lowered into the simmering tartar solution. Immediately the liquid begins to work. The fire scale, which is primarily silver oxide with some copper oxide mixed in, reacts with the acid and dissolves. You can see it happening. The dark film lifts away from the silver, clouding the solution, turning it slightly gray. The coins beneath, as the scale dissolves, begin to show their true color. The process takes perhaps 20 minutes. The solution must be hot, just below boiling, to work efficiently. Steam rises from the cauldron, carrying with it a sharp acidic smell that makes your eyes water if you stand too close. The blancher stirs the basket occasionally with a long iron rod, ensuring the solution reaches every coin, that none stick together and shield each other from the cleaning action. When the time is right, judged by experience and by checking a coin from the basket, the whole basket is lifted free. The coins are steaming, dripping with hot tartar solution. They are rinsed immediately in a second cauldron, this one filled with clean water to wash away any remaining acid. Then they are spread on wooden racks to dry. And now, for the first time, they look like money. The silver gleams. The images stand out crisp and sharp against the bright metal. The king's profile catches the light. The cross on the reverse seems to float above the surface. These are beautiful objects, these coins. Not beautiful in the way that art is beautiful, but beautiful in their precision, their uniformity, their promise of value. Each one is nearly identical to every other. Each one speaks with the same voice, the voice of royal authority and monetary standard. But they are not all identical in the one measurement that matters most: weight, because weight determines value. A penny is defined not just by its images, but by its silver content. According to the standards of the English mint in the late 13th century, a Tower pound of sterling silver, weighing 5,400 grains, should produce exactly 243 pennies. This means each penny should weigh approximately 22.2 grains, or about 1.44 grams in modern measurement. But the blanks are cut by hand and eye. The silver spreads during striking in ways that vary slightly. Some coins will be heavier than the standard. Some will be lighter. The weighing room is perhaps the quietest place in the mint, because here the work requires concentration and precision beyond what is needed anywhere else. The weigher sits at a solid table with a balance before him. This is not the rough balance used for weighing bulk silver. This is a precision instrument, capable of detecting differences of a fraction of a grain. The beam is brass, delicately pivoted on a knife edge of hardened steel. The pans hang on silk threads to avoid adding weight. The whole assembly is enclosed in a glass case to prevent air currents from affecting the measurement. The weigher has before him a set of standard weights, small brass pieces that have been certified by the warden of the mint. The penny standard weighs exactly 22.2 grains. There is a tolerance, a permissible range. A coin can be up to half a grain light and still be acceptable because some wear is expected in circulation. But it cannot be underweight from the moment it leaves the mint. That would be fraud, a theft from whoever accepts the coin in trade. One by one, the blanched coins are weighed. The weigher places a coin in one pan of the balance and the standard weight in the other. The beam tilts. If the coin is exactly the right weight, the beam balances horizontally and remains still. If the coin is light, the standard weight drops and the coin rises. If the coin is heavy, the opposite occurs. Heavy coins present a simple problem. They contain too much silver, which means the mint is giving away metal that could have been used to make additional coins. The solution is filing. A small file, very fine, is used to remove silver from the edge of the coin until the weight is correct. The filings are collected on a piece of leather spread beneath the work area. These tiny scraps of silver, dust really, will accumulate over days and weeks until there is enough to melt down and return to the crucible. Nothing is wasted. Every particle has value. Light coins are more serious. If a coin is within tolerance, barely underweight, it might be accepted. The loss is small enough that it can be absorbed. But if a coin is significantly underweight, it must be rejected. It cannot enter circulation because it would defraud the public. The coin is marked with a small nick or punch to indicate it has been rejected, then thrown into the melt bucket to be recycled. The silver will be recovered, but the work of blanking and striking is lost, wasted. The mint master keeps track of rejection rates. Too many light coins suggest problems earlier in the process. Perhaps the blanks are being cut too small. Perhaps the beaters are making the sheets too thin. The statistics guide adjustments. The weigher works steadily through the day, coin after coin, checking each one, filing the heavy, rejecting the light, passing the acceptable ones into bags for final counting. It is tedious work, but it cannot be rushed. Every coin that leaves the mint carries the reputation of the king and the integrity of the currency. A penny that is underweight or made from debased silver undermines trust in the entire monetary system. Merchants begin to weigh coins instead of counting them. Money changers charge premiums to exchange suspicious coins for reliable ones. The whole elegant mechanism of currency, built on mutual trust and royal guarantee, begins to collapse. This is why the weighing is so important. This is why the mint master is held personally responsible for the quality of output. His wealth, his position, perhaps his life, depend on maintaining standards. And this is why, several times a year, there is a ceremony that strikes fear into every mint master in the kingdom. The trial of the pyx. The pyx is a wooden box, bound with iron, lockable with two separate locks requiring two separate keys. Throughout the year, as coins are produced, samples are taken at random and placed into this box. Not many, perhaps one coin from every 1,000 struck, but enough that the box gradually fills with a representative collection of the mint's output. The coins are not selected by the mint master. They are selected by the warden's representative, a man whose job is to watch for fraud and ensure the king's interests are protected. The coins are dropped through a slot in the lid of the pyx, and once inside, they cannot be removed until the trial. The trial happens at Westminster, in the presence of the warden of the mint, representatives of the king's treasury, and a jury of goldsmiths and assiers from the city of London. These are men who make their living from their knowledge of precious metals, men who cannot be easily fooled, men whose reputations depend on their honesty and skill. The pyx is opened with ceremony. The coins inside are counted and weighed as a group. Then they are assayed. The assay follows the same process used when testing incoming silver, but now the stakes are reversed. Instead of testing metal to see if it is pure enough to coin, the jury is testing coins to see if they contain the proper amount of silver. A sample of coins is selected from the pyx. They are melted together in a crucible to create a homogeneous mass. Then portions of this mass are cupelled, the lead carrying away impurities, until pure silver remains. The weight of pure silver is compared to the weight of the original coins. The ratio must match the sterling standard, 92.5% silver. If it does not, if the coins are debased, the mint master is in serious trouble. The penalties for fraud vary depending on the severity and whether malice or negligence was involved. A minor deviation might result in fines, confiscation of the mint master's fee for that coining period. A serious deviation, evidence of deliberate debasement, could mean imprisonment, loss of position, even execution in extreme cases. The king's currency is not a matter for games. It is the foundation of commerce, the measure of value, the medium through which power flows. To debase it is to attack the kingdom itself. But if the trial goes well, if the coins prove true, the mint master is vindicated. His competence is confirmed. His fee is paid. His position is secure. The ceremony concludes with formal acknowledgement that the coins meet standard, and this announcement is made public, posted in the city, spread by merchants and money changers. It reassures the realm that the currency is sound, that pennies can be trusted, that the weight and purity are guaranteed by the king's authority and verified by independent experts. The mint master attends the trial in person. He brings his records, his accounts of silver received and coins delivered, his logs of die usage and rejection rates. He answers questions from the jury. He explains any anomalies, and he waits, with what must be considerable anxiety, for the assay results. Even a careful and honest master can fail through bad luck or the incompetence of subordinates. A moneyer who substituted cheap brass filings for silver dust and pocketed the difference. A melter who misjudged the alloy ratio. A weigher who passed underweight coins to curry favor with a merchant. The master is responsible for all of it. When the day's work ends at the mint, when the last coin is struck and the furnaces are banked, a transformation occurs. The building, so full of noise and heat and motion throughout the day, becomes quiet. The hammers stop their percussion. The furnaces dim to glowing embers. The workers wash the metal dust from their hands and face, change from their leather aprons into street clothes, and file out through the guarded door. They are checked as they leave, a cursory search to ensure no one is stealing silver scraps or finished coins. Then they are gone, disappearing into the London evening, heading to taverns or homes, leaving the work behind. But the coins remain. The day's production, perhaps 10,000 pennies, has been counted and bagged. The bags are heavy, each one containing 1,000 coins, about 3.5 pounds of silver. They are tied shut and sealed with wax, stamped with the mint master's mark, and then they are locked away. The strong room is in the center of the mint building, with no external walls, no windows, accessible only through a single door of oak reinforced with iron bands. The door has 3 locks, and the 3 keys are held by 3 different officials. The mint master has one. The warden's representative has another. The captain of the guard has the third. All 3 must be present to open the strong room. All 3 must witness what is placed inside or removed. The bags of coins are carried in and stacked on wooden shelves built against the stone walls. The room is small, perhaps 10 feet square, but it contains more wealth than most men will see in a lifetime. As the bags accumulate over weeks and months, the strong room fills. 100 bags, 1,000. Each bag represents hours of skilled labor, tons of charcoal burned, crucibles consumed, dyes worn down. And each bag represents value, purchasing power, the ability to buy grain or cloth or labor or land. The door closes, the 3 locks engage. The keys are returned to their separate keepers, and then the guards take their posts. The mint is never unguarded. Even at night, even on holy days when no work occurs, armed men stand watch. 2 at the outer door, 2 at the strong room. They work in shifts, changing every 6 hours, alert for any sign of intrusion. The Tower of London itself is a fortress, but the mint takes no chances. The temptation is too great. The wealth concentrated here could fund an army, could buy a fleet of ships, could corrupt officials and bribe gatekeepers. There have been attempts over the years. Thieves who tried to tunnel under the walls. Corrupt guards who planned to overpower their fellows and flee with what they could carry. Forgers who attempted to sneak base metal blanks into the striking room, hoping to produce counterfeit coins with genuine dies. All have failed. The systems of oversight, the multiple keys, the constant verification, the separation of duties, these were developed over centuries specifically to prevent theft and fraud. The mint is more secure than the royal treasury, more guarded than the crown jewels. In the silence of the night, the coins rest in their bags, in their locked room, protected by stone and steel and vigilant men. Each coin is a frozen moment of transformation, a disk of silver that carries the memory of fire and force. The silver remembers the crucible's heat. The shape remembers the hammer's blow. The images remember the graver's patient cutting of the dies. And together, these coins represent something more than metal, more than craftsmanship. They represent trust. Trust that the weight is true. Trust that the silver is pure. Trust that the king's image means what it claims to mean, that the penny in your hand can be exchanged for bread or cloth or labor, that the value is real and stable and guaranteed. This trust is what makes money work, not the metal itself, which could be melted down and sold, but the social agreement that these particular pieces of metal, stamped with these particular images, carry value beyond their raw material worth. The mint master, sleeping in his quarters within the tower complex, carries the weight of that trust. His reputation, his livelihood, his safety, all depend on maintaining the standards. Tomorrow he will rise and return to the workshop. The furnaces will be stoked. The hammers will begin their rhythm. More silver will arrive. More blanks will be cut. More coins will be struck. The cycle continues, day after day, year after year, as long as there is trade and commerce and civilization. And somewhere far from London, in a village market, or a port city, or a merchant's counting house, the coins struck yesterday or last week or last year are changing hands. A farmer accepts one for a bushel of wheat. A weaver gives two in exchange for wool. A landlord collects a dozen as rent. The coins flow through the economy like blood through a body, enabling transactions, storing value, measuring worth. Most people never think about where the coins come from, about the skill and labor required to produce them. They simply accept a penny as a penny, trust its value, and pass it along. But you know now. You have stood in the mint and watched the process from beginning to end. You have seen the silver tested and melted, beaten and cut, struck and blanched and weighed. You have heard the hammers fall and the dies crack. You have felt the heat of the furnaces and breathed the metallic air. You know what goes into making money, the precision and care, the oversight and verification, the guards and locks and trials. You understand that currency is not magic. It is craft and trust combined. The chests are locked. The silver cools in the darkness. The guards stand watch. The value remains true. The work is done. And as the medieval night settles over the tower, as the city beyond the walls quiets and sleeps, as the Thames flows eternal past stone walls that have stood for 200 years and will stand for 200 more, you can rest in the knowledge that the systems persist. The coins are safe. The weight is honest. The king's face stares out from thousands of small silver mirrors, proclaiming authority and guaranteeing value. And as the chests are locked and the silver cools in the silence of the vault, the value remains true. The work is done. Sleep well.